Hey guys, it's Lion here with HobbiesofaMan once again, and today our Ramble video is going to be about adaptations and how insane it is that they continue to be horrible and bad, and that Hollywood can't seem to do a good job at making them work. I don't really want this to be a vitriolic video. I don't really like being like angry or upset in my videos, but I might get there with this topic. I'm not really sure. I will try not to, but basically, there's been a lot of situations lately. We live in the golden age of adaptations, right? Of taking well-established, well-beloved IP and turning it into TV shows so that you can have a guaranteed fan base right off the get-go, right? However, even though they're doing it to have a fan base, most of the time, the people that are in charge of these things, in charge of making these adaptations, find a way to make it fucking the worst possible thing for the built-in fan base. They publish articles and conversations that are alienating to the given fan base. They change characters just to change them. They change plot lines just to change them. They try to adapt things to make it fit to screen, even though they usually don't have to do it that way. And they do it the worst way possible. They do it in a way that doesn't really work. And sometimes they do changes that are meaningful and useful and helpful. And it's very rare that happens, though. In my personal experience, I'm into a lot of things, and I have seen many adaptations. A lot of them were bad, but because I saw them either around this time that I was a child or before I saw or consumed the original media, I liked them. For example, I enjoyed the Aragon movie back in the day when I watched it because I saw it before I read the book. Now, as an adult, I don't really like Aragon. I don't think it's a great story. I think that there is value in it, and it's value that I've argued with people about before. The value of Aragon is that it was a great piece of fiction to introduce children to epic fantasy. There was no real way to get into epic fantasy as a child when I was growing up until Aragon came about, right? Like, technically, yes, you could just read The Hobbit, but The Hobbit is written like it was made 100 years ago, because it kind of was. And so it's hard to read as an adult. I don't like reading it. I've never finished reading it. I'd rather just watch the movies, even though they're not actually good adaptations, because I at least like what they look like, right? But Aragon was simple. It was written by a kid, and it had very modern language, right? And so it was very easy to read as a 10-year-old kid after I watched the movie. And so that was my introduction to epic fantasy. And from there, I was able to pick up all the other great epic fantasy things, and eventually make my way to Brandon Sanderson and Patrick Rothfuss and, George R. R. Martin and all of these, and Robert Jordan and all these great authors, right? So Aragon is a perfect way to get into epic fantasy, even though it's a very derivative work. And I liked the movie, and it was successful at getting me to check out the books. And that is actually, I think, why most adaptations, or actually, it is the only positive that really comes out of most adaptations, even when they're bad. And I think that's fine. That ultimately is good, I guess. But it always bothers me when things are changed or modified for no reason. In Wheel of Time, there are so many changes and so many things that are cut and removed and played with and just kind of mangled just to please, like, I guess, Rafe Judkins, the showrunner, because there was no need to change anything from the series. The only thing you had to do was condense things. That is not a change. That is a what's it called? Editing. You didn't have to fucking, take this perfect piece of bread and then just crumble it and turn it into flour and then make another piece of bread that looks vaguely like the original, but uglier than before, right? Like that is basically what the Wheel of Time show did. And I don't know why. I don't understand why they do this. Like, if you understand that this thing that you're choosing to adapt already has a shit ton of fans, otherwise you wouldn't even know about it, and you understand that this is something that people like, and you understand that you want to make money off of it, why the fuck do people change things from these adaptations, or like in these adaptations of material? Now, I understand sometimes something that is done in reading or in writing that is read can't be directly translated because it would look or sound or feel really dumb. I understand things like that. Like, sometimes dialogue just can't work when you speak it because it sounds horrible when actually said out loud. So I understand changing dialogue, right? Like, that is understandable. And ultimately, dialogue changes all the time. Writing and speech changes all the time, regardless of what happens, because anytime you translate something or anytime that you pick up a book that's older than 20 years, there's going to be changes and differences and things that you have to adjust, right? So I don't mind dialogue changes. I think that those are fine and understandable. But like changing the order of operations of plots usually doesn't work for me. It works in Invincible, for example, where some of the plot lines are finished or finalized in the first season that in the comic book aren't really finalized until much later. And it works in Invincible because it's supposed to be like kind of like an anime arc thing. It's supposed to like progress from lame villains to big villains to even larger villains, and so it makes sense to create this build up, right? Whereas in the comic book, what was happening was that Robert Kirkman wanted to keep people engaged, and so he had to make characters that would reappear later to continue this continuity or this investment across time, right? That's not really necessary when you're binging something, right? Or where or when you're like actively checking for connection to a specific character, right? It makes sense to change these things because the medium and the way that the medium is sold and the way the medium is consumed is different. I understand these sort of things, but most of the time when people make changes to the source material for adaptations, they are not doing these types of changes. They are just fucking with things to either fit some agenda that they have. I don't mean political agenda. I mean just like whatever reasons they have and they personally believe, they're trying to inject that into the source material through the adaptation. And this is not necessarily like something I dislike. I think that sometimes it is good and it makes sense, but usually it doesn't. Like Rafe Judkins loves Egwene, so he's making Egwene basically have all of the moments that are supposed to be Rand's in the show. That is not good. You are fundamentally changing the series, and you're not actually doing a good job at adapting it. If people change their language, and maybe this is me being pedantic, and I'm okay with it. If people change their language and didn't call things adaptations, and instead they called them like shows based around the themes or the ideas or the storyline of said thing that they're adapting, I think that would be much better. It would temper expectations better. It would make things less annoying and horrible. And it would make people less likely to become vitriolic online. And it would make things easier for everyone. Like, I don't really enjoy going online and then seeing people talk about the adaptations of things and completely lambasting them, because there is no reason to be angry about these things. And honestly, there's no reason to even have to get angry about these things, because the source material exists. But if you choose to adapt it, you should follow the source material as best as you can. And I don't know why Hollywood, or people that adapt things in general, Netflix, I guess also, chooses not to do this. Now, it might be because a lot of these people just want the job, and they don't actually like what they're working on. They just need a job so that they can advance their careers. And so they just fuck with it to try to make it more like something they want to work on. And if that is the case, first of all, I'm very sorry for those people that have to work like that in a shitty environment that they don't really like, on something that they don't want to work on. That sucks. But also, fuck them for doing this. Like, I think it was Halo, that the first season of the Halo TV show, which I have not watched because I heard, and I saw with my own eyes. And, you know, I follow a lot of film pundits, especially ones that relate to sci-fi stuff, talk about how not like Halo the show was. And apparently that's because all of the people working on that show didn't really care about making a Halo show. They wanted to make a show, a sci-fi show, but no one would pick it up because it was probably bad, I'm guessing, until they attached it to the Halo label. And so they used the Halo label and the idea that they were going to adapt something from Halo as a way to circumvent the issue of them being bad at their jobs, which sucks, right? And I'm guessing that's what the Witcher people did as well, except for Henry Cavill. Henry Cavill obviously loves The Witcher, right? But, I mean, you've all seen the articles where they say that everyone thought that Henry Cavill was annoying because he gave a shit. That sucks. I found The Witcher to be fine, actually. I didn't really hate it. I didn't like that it was not like the books, but it was kind of like the books, at least initially. And also the fact that it was like translated means that there was already like a barrier to the true work, as it were, because it was translated to English, and then the popularity of the Witcher is actually from the video game, which is not actually based on the stories from The Witcher, just the idea of it. And so, like, I don't know, that one was like, I would be willing to let it slide to an extent until they started saying all these things, and then they kicked out Henry Cavill, and all, like, it's just bad, right? Like, it just looks bad. And mostly this idea, this concept, which I've been very bad about explaining, I do apologize for that. That's just kind of the point of these Ramble videos. It's just unscripted, just kind of random, vaguely connected lane of thoughts here. All of this comes from all of the recent Avatar: The Last Airbender live action problems that have been coming up, which is a lot of articles or a lot of interviews about all of the changes that have been done, and the fact that all of these changes are all negatives. Like, they're basically trying to sanitize Sokka, remove Aang's crux as a character, and, you know, like, do a bunch of changes like this. So they try to remove the sexism that is prevalent in Sokka's character in the first season of the show, in the first book. And although I understand the idea of, like, we don't want our hero to be sexist because heroes shouldn't have these problems or these sort of like issues, that is fundamentally going against the point of the character. The point of the character is that his lifestyle and the position that he found himself in made him think like this, and then the situation that happened after he met Aang made him have to reevaluate and become a better person. And the crux of it was that his journey to adulthood was overcoming this sexist viewpoint and to grow as a man into someone that believes that everyone is able to do what everyone wants to do, right? Like, the point of him, of Sokka, is that he's stupid, and he's funny, and he has a boomerang, and he doesn't think girls can fight until they beat his ass, and then he realizes, oh, there is more to women than just what I thought there was. And that is a fundamental thing that is probably very important to today's society, when everyone is mad at dudes like, you know, Jordan Peterson and the stupid Eastern European guy, what's this, Andrew Tate or whatever, and all of these people that are problematic and should not have avenues to share their ideas, right? But removing someone that overcomes these kind of problems in a day and age when these problems are prevalent is a bad idea. And then with Aang, they made these comments about how they're going to remove Aang's playfulness and childishness, in the sense that the first book, the arc of the first book, and actually the arc of all of Aang's story, is the reluctant hero, but like to an extreme extent, right? Like Aang did not want to be the Avatar, but he became it anyways. Aang ran away from his responsibilities, and by running away from his responsibilities, he doomed his people. Then he was trapped in ice for 100 years, breaking the cycle of the Avatar, and he appears when everyone needs him most, but because he is still a childish, dumb 12-year-old, he does not want to take on that responsibility, justly so, because a child should not have to save the world. But he has to anyways, because that is the responsibility that has been thrust on him by life, right? And so he has to do it. And the first book, the first season, was based around him trying to find a way to get rid of his responsibility, trying to avoid his responsibility, and then eventually having to own up to it, and eventually fighting the Fire Lord at the end of the series, right? Like, that is important and fundamental, and is also very important to the modern era. Gen Zers and younger people have problems with responsibility, and we need to be shown how to deal with it and have good, responsible role models. And Aang could be one, because you can see the transition from a child that is irresponsible, that doesn't want to deal with his reality, into someone that finds a way to stay true to himself while also achieving the thing that he has been set to do, right? Like, those are important things, and you should not remove them to sanitize your characters. This is bad. I do not understand why they chose to do this. This is horrible. And yeah, so adaptations usually bad because people make changes that are stupid. Those are my thoughts on that. However, there are some good adaptations. I've mentioned them. I mean, Harry Potter is a good adaptation. Invincible is a good adaptation. One Piece is a good adaptation. People didn't like the changes in One Piece, and I understand why. Like, One Piece isn't broken, don't fix it. But also, the changes made for the live action show were actually very well made, very thoughtful, and actually make sense because the first portion of One Piece, the first 100 chapters or so, don't follow the formula that every other arc, or every other saga actually, which is basically a block of about 100 chapters, does follow. And so the show, the live action adaptation, changed the happenings of the first 100 episodes, or the first 100 chapters of the story, to fit that formula, that mold that is so quintessential to One Piece, in a way that felt satisfying and thoughtful. And it introduced one of the major cruxes and themes of One Piece much earlier and much faster than it was introduced in the manga. So I think in general, the One Piece live action adaptation is not necessarily the definitive version of One Piece, because ultimately the manga is the original, and also it is essentially better. Like, I do think the manga is better, but it is at least a definitive adaptation in a very well thought out second version of the story that is well done. The anime is not that good. And maybe the One Piece anime, the second anime that they're going to do, the new version of the anime, might actually take some of those same ideas from the One Piece live action in order to, you know, make the story much more in line with the current way that Oda writes it. Which also brings up this idea that usually people think that as long as the original creator is attached to the adaptation, it's probable that it's going to be good. However, that is not actually the case. If you look at Percy Jackson, there are some problems with that show. It is not adapted that well, in my opinion. However, also, I am willing to admit that with Percy Jackson specifically, I think I just aged out of that series. The last time I read Percy Jackson was about 10 years ago or so. I liked the first movie. I didn't like the second movie. I don't think the first movie is that good, but I do like it at least a little bit more than I like the show, at least so far. I've only watched 7 episodes. I am about to watch the last episode here after I finish recording this, but even though Rick Riordan is intimately tied to the writing of this show does not actually feel like the books, at least my memories of the books. And I think that is sad. It also muddies the waters a lot because this is a situation where the original author is not treating his series the way his fans wanted him to treat it, which is very weird because on one hand, he is the original author, so he should be able to change his story if he wants. But also, I don't want him to change his story. I want the version that I knew on screen. But also, at least it's not some psycho random person that works at Hollywood that made all of these changes and made it worse. So, like, how am I supposed to feel? Like, that is my biggest problem with Percy Jackson. It's that I can't fault it because the original writer is the one that made the changes. But also, I don't like the changes. But also, it could have been way worse. So I'm kind of happy that it isn't. And it just feels weird, man. But, yes, adaptations, bad. I wish everything was just kind of like, there was a way to just turn the words into, video with real people without having to go through this iterative process with a bunch of people that want to add in their own junk and crap into the story, but that is not possible. So we'll probably end up having a lot of bad adaptations for the future, but hopefully eventually every series with a fan base that is supportive and good will eventually get a good adaptation. Because I have felt the pain of that not being possible, even though, Wheel of Time looks good. It is not the Wheel of Time. It is something akin to it, kind of flavored by it. And I don't think that I will see an adaptation that is good and actually manages to match the books in my lifetime. I think that was the one and only time that the Wheel of Time was going to be adapted, and it's bad. And there's no merchandise associated with it, so I can't even own anything that I like about the series. And that sucks. One Piece, at least, has a good adaptation. I like it. I think it's good. And it sucks, man. I don't know. So, yeah, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you thought. I'm sorry this is all over the place. This is even more rambly than my usual ramble video. So, I think that's mostly because I haven't really thought about this topic until today. So, hopefully, it works out. But, yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. And let me know what you thought. And see you guys later.